The UK and sterling has managed to avoid the attention of the markets recently, but there is a run of important economic data out this week concerning the British economy, which could turn the focus back on Britain. To discuss the employment situation, I'm joined by Albert Ellis, who is the CEO of recruitment firm Harvey Nash. They recently co-published a UK job survey. Albert, thanks for speaking to me. Many were hoping the private sector would pick up the slack from the public sector after those layoffs. Has this been the case?
Very interesting point. Firstly, we have stated in the last 12 months that we believe over the medium term that jobs generated by the private sector will take up the slack. We've seen this in other countries that have retrenched, where their public sector has become too big. In the Nordics in the 90s, in Canada in the 90s. Plenty of examples of economies that have recovered from both a debt problem and a situation where the public sector has become too large for the economy. Secondly, the big question facing us is, will the economic recovery be sufficiently stable and increase over time such that the jobs that are lost in the public sector are created at broadly the same time in the private sector, so as not to cause too much of a dislocation in the transition, that is to say, we don't have too many people unemployed whilst the private sector is catching up. And that's where we have a slight question mark. We think that possibly the scale of the cuts has been quite dramatic and will actually impact the jobs market quite significantly. But the private sector is not going to digest all of those individuals and those people seeking new jobs in a short period of time. It will take some time for the jobs growth to catch up with the release of public sector workers.
We all know how uncertain the global economic outlook is at the moment, so who is actually hiring in this environment?
One of the sectors that appears to be more robust than we would expect is the manufacturing sector. Even though there's been a good recovery and subsequently there has been flagged a little bit of a slowdown, our evidence and the surveys and our clients anecdotally are telling us that their order books are relatively full. They have quite long lead times with order books. Some of the real high-tech aerospace and defense manufacturers have they're quite bullish because the Middle East, for example, is buying aeroplanes. The emerging markets are investing in infrastructure. So export markets, traditional export markets, which would have been Europe, have somewhat been replaced, certainly in the manufacturing sector, by demand coming from emerging markets and new markets. Some of the black spots are transport, construction, certainly financial services has had a major slowdown in the last 6 months. Just a few of the areas that we're actually exposed to that we can comment on.
So what do the results of this survey tell us going forward? Will we continue to see employers hire, but in very small amounts?
When 8 out of 10 indicate that they will either stay the same size or increase the size of their workforce, I think that's a pretty powerful signal. But you make a good point that what is the real scale of the recruitment going forward? It seems to be targeted. It is not a sort of broad general move to grow the business across the board. It's about growing those parts of the businesses that are enjoying rather better demand than the others. So it's selective. It's probably smaller. The brightest spot for me is that the SME market, the small to medium-sized market, which has been very quiet for the last 3 years. I mean, suffering from lack of credit, suffering from cash flows, suffering from perhaps slower pay. A lot of SMEs are supplying big companies which have been affected by the credit crunch and therefore have been paying so much slower. This whole sector, which is the engine of the economy, has not been hiring, and for the first time we've seen that their readings dramatically up. So the SME market's indicating they are going to hire. Now, if it's a large company indicating it's going to hire, it might only grow its workforce by 2 or 3%. In the case of WPP this year, I think Sir Martin Sorrells indicated he's going to take on 5,000 people over the organisation across the world with a total employment of 153,000. So that's about 3.5%, 3%. If you look at an SME and call an SME anything up to 100 people, adding between 5 and 10 people in a year is adding over 5%. So if all SMEs hire only single-digit recruits in the next 12 months, it makes an enormous difference because of the size of the sector.
Albert Ellis joining me down the line there. UK jobless figures are out at 9:30 GMT on Wednesday morning, and it's definitely a release which is worth monitoring closely. But for now, goodbye.